Assalamu alaikum. My name is Fadwa Wazwaz. I'm continuing with the story and the lessons on Joseph and Jacob, power and projection. I'm going to transition back to Moses, lessons on power and oppression. And these are lessons that it helps to cleanse the lens that we see the world, that we see ourselves, that we listen to others, to the stories they tell. It's not about like whose side you're on. It's more about promoting clarity, reason, understanding in society, because all of us want to solve problems that are taking place in society. We all have our solutions. But none of us really understand the situation, how these solutions impact us, impact society, and also impact future generations. It helps for us as we are engaged in these solutions that we promote clarity, we promote reason, because a lot of the illnesses that we see, social illnesses, physical illnesses, they are impacted or affected by the lack of clarity and confusion that takes place, which causes stress on our bodies. There are some individuals who have made commentary, and myself, my own just reflections, that the lack of clarity and confusion in society can at times like create or nurture mental illnesses in society. I mentioned that again on my YouTube channel about the neon gods, if you will, that when we are not clear about who we are, or not clear about our purpose here, creates a lot of confusion, and a lot of this confusion might imprison us mentally, emotionally, socially, spiritually, and we may resort to imprisoning others physically. So you'll see and you'll meet two sets of people, and both are imprisoned. Well, one set, this is not again a general statement, but just for reflection, may be imprisoned physically, in the sense of people in Gaza in a concentration camp. I'm talking about not someone who's a murderer put in prison. And another individual might be imprisoned given the way that they are acting and the way that they have hyped up the crowd, if you will, to engage in such actions, that they are imprisoned as well, but they are imprisoned emotionally, mentally, socially, and spiritually. So this is how I'd like to begin, because this is about Joseph in prison. I did a few snapshots, clips that I will put in the description of this video on YouTube. And I will use these lessons as I weave it into back power and oppression lessons from Moses. And again, here I would like to transition from Joseph in prison into Moses when he leaves also as the prince in the kingdom of the Pharaoh, and he goes to the land of the Midian. So here I'd like you kind of like to see both transition points of Joseph from being kind of the servant in the kingdom, and he's going into prison, and then transition into Moses going from being the prince of the Pharaoh into now going into the land of the Midian. So look at kind of both transition points. I want to take these lessons, and again, we're weaving the lessons with each other. So let's look at this from a scholarly commentary. We left off where, remember, Joseph, it was proven true that he was innocent. Potiphar was asked to see the evidence by the wise man, and he recognized that Joseph is indeed innocent. Oops, I don't think I shared, did I? No, I did not. Okay, so here I am, sorry. So he noticed that Joseph is indeed innocent. He gave him how to judge, and he gave him the evidence. And so the Potiphar went, and he looked, he took the, here's a test, here's how you should examine the evidence, go and check. So he goes and he checks, as we said. And he says, yes, the shirt is torn from behind. She has lied, and he's truthful. So he recognized the evidence is there. As I mentioned regarding the UN investigation, you go before, International Court of Justice, you go before the ICC. Anyway, they go ahead and they issue an opinion based on law, based on reason. You have people who are study genocide, and they have qualifications in genocide, and they're not like, what is the word I'm trying to see here? Like tribal in their way of doing things. They're interested in preventing genocide against them, genocide by them. So they have that kind of like, I'm for truth. I am for justice. If justice is against my people, justice is against the others, and my people are wrong, they have that. They have demonstrated that they have that level of moral stamina that they are willing to act upon. So when the Potiphar saw that, now he's seeing that his wife is wrong. But here is where the issue begins. And we see this again with the United States, European countries. You've seen the past 100 years, evidence upon evidence upon evidence. Israel is engaged in terrorism. Israel is engaged in war crimes. Israel is building illegal settlements. Israel is ethnically cleansing Palestinians. So you're seeing these numerous crimes upon crimes. Israel is engaged in raping, for example, Palestinians. Israel is taking Palestinians hostage, trial and without due process, so on and so on and so on. But what happens is once they see the evidence, this is the point I'm trying to get at here. It's those techniques of neutralization. Do you recognize the crime? Do you recognize your responsibility? Do you recognize the victim? So here you could see he recognized the crime. This is a crime. And so initially, if you were following the United States or other countries, they would say what Israel is doing, is criminal. But what happened is they didn't recognize their responsibility. They didn't hold Israel accountable, and they didn't recognize the victim. So what happens in situations like this is when you recognize the crime, but you don't recognize the victims, and you don't recognize your responsibility, given the power that you have. Remember, who has power? What kind of power? How's it being used? You don't recognize your power. You're being tested here. Potiphar, for example, he's being tested here. You have power. You see the evidence. What are you going to do? And a lot of people in power are kind of in his shoes. Think of this less about, again, sexual situation, and think about it about a call to disobedience. As I mentioned here, remember, acknowledge the call, acknowledge the snare, and then acknowledge the mob or cheerleaders. That's what I'd like you to think about here. So the call was made. Joseph resisted the call. She went from, again, not calling, but also compounding that call by running after him, after he resisted. So you see now, again, the crime is compounded. Then they were caught at the door. And so she went now from calling him to disobedience, as the Quran mentions, then throwing the crime onto an innocent person. So it went into, now the crime is being further compounded. Person said no, you went after them. Then you, on top of the fact that you went after them, you then, when you were caught, which tells you what, when she projected, it's, you could say it's a subtle confession when she projected that she recognized what she's calling him to is wrong. Why do people like throw the crime onto an innocent person? If it's good, you know, like everyone wants to be a champion, you would say, hey, you know, it was me. Everyone would say it's me. We all love to like praise ourselves for good things. So if internally what she knew, this is here what I'm trying to get at, that her soul is testifying to her. She knew what she was doing is wrong. Because it's kind of like the brothers of Joseph. They knew what they were doing is wrong. Because if you don't know, you would not be projecting what you did onto an innocent person. It's just that understanding that, or self-awareness that you're wrong and turning to God to repent. This is why I get this whole issue about self-compassion, self-love, this, and just kind of walk with me here as I walk you through it. So she knew he was wrong. She projected that wrong onto Joseph. But the issue is the Potiphar, after investigating the evidence, recognizing she lied and he is truthful, did absolutely nothing. He just kind of resorted to, this is how I see it, he resorted to some, you know, sexist explanation. This is just a woman thing. It's not a woman's thing, because we saw, for example, the brothers did the same thing to Joseph, right? They also were colluding with each other to put him in the well. So it's, again, it's the call. Like, recognize the call and recognize the snare, but also the projection, because the projection tells you what they know what they are doing is wrong. Why do people project? They know killing is wrong. Why do they say the Palestinians kill? It means you know killing is wrong. You just don't want to own it. You want to attribute it to someone else. So this is kind of how criminal behavior, like if how it's sort of like how the seed sprouts, but how it grows. Just like how goodness is also a seed, and how it sprouts and how it grows. This is how criminal behavior, how it starts to like grow and expand. So it begins with deny, project, but then if they're proven liars, like the evidence is shown as clear as day against them, but you do nothing with that evidence. Because a lot of times people will say, okay, Israel, bad. You know, like they caught Israel and they looked at the evidence and it turns out they shot Shireen Abu Akleh. But they did nothing. And some people will turn it around and say, well, it's a Jewish thing. Well, we're not into here Jew versus, you know, what ethnicity. This is not about Jewish thing, non-Jewish thing. This is about a crime was committed. Who's responsible? Who has power to act and hold those accountable? Prosecute. Whether they're Jews, they're non-Jews, you know, once you're human, you have the capacity to do good and evil. And when you do evil, you should be called to account. That's the point here. So when the husband saw Joseph's shirt torn from behind, he exclaimed, surely this is one of the tricks of you women. Your tricks are indeed great. It's Kate, and I love the way, again, Sheikh Asharawi mentions, and also Ramadan al-Bouti, where they both talk about kaid, the conniving, manipulative. It's not a woman thing, because people misunderstood me. It's a criminal thing. I mentioned it here. Not just the brothers of Joseph, but these were, again, people, the chiefs of the town, when they couldn't get their way, and I'll mention it again, they took an oath amongst themselves to try to kill the prophet and his family. And so they started to collude. Again, it's that kaid, that colluding with each other. And then they will say, and then they'll come out the next morning, we didn't witness the destruction of his family. Indeed, we are truthful. This is again, these are not ethnically Jews. They're not women. But this is how criminal behavior functions or malfunctions. This is how it's done. So I'm trying to get at. It's not acknowledge the call, acknowledge the kaid. There's this scheme that is taking place behind the scenes. And then again, this PR campaign of what to come out in the front lines and say. So he attributed, this is again, he's like a coward, if you will. He has power, but he doesn't have courage. He recognized the evidence is on the side of Joseph, but he doesn't have the courage or the moral stamina to put his foot down and say, I'm going to hold you accountable. That's the point I'm trying to get at. And this is what happened with Israel. Over time, impunity, 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 or they would say bad Israel. They just, give them a small little, slap on the wrist, bad, you shouldn't kill Palestine. But they would do nothing. They give them arms and arms and arms. That's not helpful. And they give them arms and arms and arms. Don't do that. That's the point I'm getting at. This impunity, impunity, impunity. It's a reflection of the cowardice of those who are in power. They have power, but they don't have the courage to use that power to end the injustice that is taking place in Brooklyn. And so he turns forward to Joseph, and we see this, do we not? Think of Joseph again as like the Palestinians. How many times have we heard, disregard this? Disregard this, and you women ask forgiveness for your sin, for indeed it is you who has been at fault. How many times have we seen where, don't talk about it, just let it go. It's not a big deal. I already told them it's not helpful. What more do you want? Are you trying to be Semitic, but it's, again, it's like all the permutations of avoiding accountability and responsibility. This is how the techniques of neutralization work. You recognize the crime, the evidence pointed out as clear as day, but you're not accepting the responsibility and accountability to hold those who committed the crime accountable before law. And so what this leads to is, again, you have now the gossip. This is like the gossipers, the town gossipers, they start to go in all different directions with the lies. Sometimes these lies can be hurtful towards the woman in the prime minister's wife, or they can go another direction. They can be amplifying lies against Palestinians, to try to justify the crime that Israel committed. But this is all, again, as a byproduct of the failure to act and to hold those accountable to justice. So the byproduct. So try to see the entire process of how this takes place. Now, had he held her accountable, this would not have occurred, and then we see like that where Joseph ends up in prison, this too would not have occurred. Now she hears, one of the things as I mentioned about oppressors is they worry about their image, and they worry about their image because they have already overpowered their own soul. Their ego overpowered their soul. And so they tend to be like following their ego, and they worry a lot. When you worry a lot about what people say about you, you don't really care about what God thinks or sees or hears or witnesses about you. You're more concerned about your image in the eyes of people than your soul or the condition of your heart, your moral stamina. You're not worried about these things. You're worried about being great in the eyes of people looking up to you. So this is, again, this false understanding of light unto nations is people looking up to you instead of you acting on morals and showing like the moral stamina that is required of you during testing time. So hearing of their sly talk, chief's wife sent for those ladies and arranged for them a banquet. It's very similar, as I mentioned here. Very similar to, they said, take a mutual oath by Allah that we will kill him. But it's that kid. You know, when you are facing loss, there was an argument between the prophet and the people of the town, and they realized they lost the argument. Argument based on reason, argument based on, again, investigation, evidence. So what happens with individuals who have a criminal mind, they function in a criminal way, is they will start to engage in sinful cunning games to overpower the truth, to distort, or to kill the messenger. And that's what we're seeing here. People understood it as put down on women. Remember, began with the brothers did the same thing. They had that, we talked about the conversation where they were talking about Jacob, about Joseph, without Jacob and Joseph. So this scheme is going to be impacting somebody, and that individual is not involved in the conversation. So she's having this conversation. She's going to be now taking these gossipers and turning them into cheerleaders. So this is what happens again when you fail to call those accountable to justice, you know, those who have committed the crime to justice. Is then the gossipers, those who are talking, can easily be swayed. They can easily be manipulated to become the cheerleaders. Because just, you know, crime requires accountability. It requires people be held accountable. It takes situations from, again, deny, project to, you can say market or brainwash, however you want to look at it, and then to make something that is criminal normalized. So here she's calling the woman. Many people are familiar with the story about how she tries to now rationalize and justify. And again, the important thing here is how criminals will invite the gossipers or those who are not seeing them great because they like fell from grace, this idea of rise, you know. So here they're trying to worry about promoting their greatness in the eyes of people, and they resort to tremendous amount of cunning games to claim victory by convincing, manipulating, playing like the magicians playing with people's perception and mind so that they can be great in the eyes of people. And so they present a distortion of reality to overpower the truth and lay a claim that justifies what they are doing. And we saw this with Israel, where they brought, here she's bringing the people of the town. These are like the top women of the kingdom, okay? But we saw this with the situation of Israel, where they brought celebrities, as I mentioned, in critical thinking versus propaganda. One of the tricks is you bring people who have like large platforms, celebrities, Hillary Clinton, you know, they went through all of these individuals who are voice hogs, big names, and they started to go around and say, well, this, you know, what would you do? What would you do? Remember the what would you do? Everybody's repeating that what would you do scenario. Well, what would you do if October 7th happened? What would you do if October? They don't say, what would you do if someone waged a 100-year war against your country? What would you do if somebody took your homeland? They would just start with the point about where they want to justify criminal behavior. It's the what would you do? I want to do is again, it's a a cheerleading cry. It's an invitation to, I want to genocide people. I need you to come to my side. I need cheerleaders. I need you to, you know, to come to my side. I need you to go from being, you know, just gossipers into cheerleaders now. So it's that justification, rationalization, at the same time, avoiding, as we see, not just avoiding in this case, threatening. ICC was threatened, ICJ was threatened, threatening independent human rights experts and independent human rights organizations. UNRWA was, you know, threatened, you know. So it's that rallying cry for cheerleaders to take, again, the criminal action into the normalization stage. First, they bombed Al-Ahli hospitals, we recall. Then they went deny, deny, deny. So they recognized when they denied and they said it was Hamas. Remember that how it began? They recognized at that moment that bombing a hospital was wrong. Why else would they say Hamas? Then when the evidence showed that they bombed the hospital, they realized is the issue of when you fail to hold people accountable, then how it starts to even get exponentially compounded and worse. Is they realize now that what they really need to do is not to say Hamas bombed the hospital, but they need to cheerlead people, you know, like market, sell, get people to recognize bombing hospitals is okay because Hamas is there. Bombing schools is okay, Hamas is there. Bombing this and bombing everything that you can bomb is okay because Hamas is there. So then went from deny, project, to then justify, rationalize. That's what I'm trying to get at. So now it became, not only did we bomb the hospital, we're going to bomb more hospitals. We're going to bomb everything we want to bomb because we can bomb and we can get away with the bombing and you can't stop us. If you look at it here, let me just see it quick. You see here. So again,
and only currency, not international law, not diplomacy, not mediation, not respect for human life. There is no red line for Israel, no law it will not breach, no norm it will not trample.
Again, we're gonna bomb and do whatever we want. If you saw the videos that they have been putting out there, they've just been bombing everything that they could do and get away with. So it went from denial, which is a recognition and acknowledgement that their soul, excuse me, is confessing that what you're doing is wrong. So they could take that, the fact that, you know, they're trying to deny something as a recognition, an acknowledgement. But when you refuse to call yourself to account, and those around you refuse to call you to account, you may think you're harming others, but you actually harm yourself, because then you go from denying, you know, into now normalizing And you start to go into those, if you all witnessed it, the stage of sadism. You're starting to even celebrate the bombing and the killing and the raping, and you're happy. You're having like this euphoria. And so you could see that's in a way like God's punishment, like God is disgracing them when they're doing, when you reach that stage, then you are being disgraced by God. Of course, they're not seeing it. They're not conscious that they're being punished and punished and punished, because the more you go, again, you descend to the lowest of the low. And you start acting in all this type of sadistic actions. You may not see it as punishment because you're killing people physically, but internally you have destroyed yourself mentally, emotionally, socially, spiritually, and people are looking at you like a monster. The entire, world is looking at you like a monster. As I mentioned, I put that video here. You're just like a runaway killing machine. Just, kill, 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 and like, no one can stop me, no one can stop me. And so this is a form of disgrace, punishment. You're disconnected from God, and you're being completely punished. Maybe, again, doesn't look that way given the lens with which we see the world. We look at and think about, can I get away with evil? Therefore, I'm great. But that's not how faith teaches us. Faith teaches us is, do you act on the morals that you claim to uphold? Then you're great. But if you don't act on those morals, then what good is there in you or the morals that you're trying to preach to the world? So here, if you see here, now she's inviting, after she invited the woman, and the gossipers turned to cheerleaders, now she's presenting that very same call to Joseph, which is that now you have to accept, you have to be subjugated, just like I got the entire community, everybody to be subjugated to this way of seeing, false way of seeing reality, this alternate reality. I'm inviting you now to join us into alternate reality. And I mentioned I have some videos, if you go to my YouTube channel, on the alternate reality, the invitation to alternate reality. And if you don't accept, alternate reality, and we see this again with Israel, the threats, then you will be imprisoned and humiliated. Another translation is, you will be the lowest of the low. What does that mean? That means that people will be brainwashed or manipulated or forced to see you as somebody who's disgraced or humiliated. And he responds with, as I mentioned here, unless thou turn away their snare from me, I might yet yield to their allure and become one of those who are unaware of right and wrong. So again, it's that issue of what she's inviting to is alternate reality. And alternate reality, those who are great are not the same people who are great in reality. There's two realities here that is taking place. There's the reality of the criminal and the reality of those who are against crime. And so those who are like humiliated and low in alternate reality might have power. And again, some of us may not see that call, but we do. You have to recognize when you're being called to be great in the world, in alternate reality, in the land of alternate reality. And how many of us will reject that call and choose to be, ourselves, so that we could see and not fall in ignorance, or to lose, like to give up our conscience, to give up our awareness of right and wrong, just to be great in the eyes of people in alternate reality. So he rejects that call. He rejects that snare of wanting to be great in alternate reality land. He's not going to give up his conscience of seeing right from wrong, because you notice they all gave up their conscience. They first knew they had some sort of inkling, feeling, tingling of right and wrong, with the rejection, with the denial, with the projection, with the gossiping, you know, all of that. They had a sense of what's right and wrong, but then when they were invited to alternate reality, to give up that awareness of right and wrong, acknowledge the call, then they gave up. They preferred to be great in alternate reality and to give up the awareness of right and wrong. And so they became cheerleaders. She went from now denying and projecting to now threatening, demanding, obligating, and now overpowering the individuals to come to her way and to rationalizing and to justifying. So you could see how it's going all the way down to the lowest of the low, where now her sense of recognizing or awareness of right from wrong is gone. And the women who now went from gossipers to cheerleaders, their awareness of right from wrong gone, but he rejects that call. He rejects, he's like, my conscience is important to me. I am not going to accept this just to be great. I'm going to hold on to my conscience, my moral stamina, and I'm not giving that up. So he ends up in prison. And many of us, based on trials and tribulations in our lives, we end up, if you will, in emotional, mental, spiritual, or physical prison. And the truth may be on our side. We may be innocent, may be hurt, may be abused, may be overpowered. And remember, I mentioned in the beginning when I talked about Joseph, I talked about when he went into the well, Jacob put into his heart, God is all-knowing, wise. That's the two names God placed into his heart because he knew something was happening. He didn't know what, but he wanted to nurture trust in himself and his son. So he said, God is all-knowing, wise, because there's that mystery about what is taking place. Here, truth is clear of what took place. Being to the awareness of right and wrong, they gave it up. He held on to his conscience. And so the names of God you turn to in such a situation is he alone is all hearing, all knowing. They're not open to listen. They're not open to knowledge. They don't value their conscience. They don't value their morals. So you turn to God. He alone is all hearing, all knowing. So when people are in that state, that psychological, if you will, prison, given of what happened around them, and then turn to God, the all hearing, all knowing. He will help you to process these thoughts. Don't turn to those who have given up or sold their soul, sold their conscience, sold that awareness from right and wrong into, dumped it out the window and went, bulldoze through, I can get away with it. I'm going to do it. You can't stop me. Try and stop me if you can. And when you see individuals have sold their soul and their conscience for what they want, what they desire, then turn to God, all hearing, all knowing, because you can't engage such people. They are slaves to themselves. They are willing slaves to their egos and their desires, and you cannot communicate with them. This is what I imagine. God intervenes between a person and their heart. So they had the invitation to reason. They had their invitation to truth. They recognized some wrong was taking place. They had to make a decisive decision then. Your soul, your conscience, or evil. They chose evil. He chose his soul and conscience. In that situation, you have to turn to God for healing, for strength, for comfort, for mercy, for tranquility. But he alone is all hearing and all knowing. Then it occurred to them that Joseph be in prison for a while, even though they had seen clear signs of Joseph's innocence and the evil ways of their leaders. So you could, example of that would be convince them, okay, we'll have elections, we'll vote, you're promoting human rights, women rights, whatever it is, an example of that, whatever your common values are. We'll follow through with those values. But then when you do, what happens is they don't like the results, they don't like the outcome. And so even though they seen the clear signs and they seen the evidence, and people like me go through this loop and go through this loop and go through this loop to appease like those who have power in their hand to take action. They don't have the moral stamina or the courage to act. So they know putting people in Gaza in a concentration camp is wrong. They know that they should end the 17-year siege. They know the West Bank belongs to the Palestinians, East Jerusalem belongs to the Palestinians. But even though the signs are there, the signs are there as clear as day of the innocence. And even though they recognize what Israel is doing is wrong, it's that lack of courage I'm trying to get at. They lack moral stamina, the courage, the dignity, the self-respect. So it's kind of like giving cowards power. That's what you're going to see. They'll do a lot of talk, but then when it comes to act, they will not do any action. Why? Because of interests, desires, overpower reason and morals. Interests and desires overpower truth. Interests and desire overpower justice. So this is where it gets us then now, as I'm going forward to the next situation of now that he's in prison. They're in prison. Before he went into prison, physical prison, Zuleika, the women who became cheerleaders, and the people who had, again, the power to judge and to hold those women accountable. All of them, again, it's not a woman thing. I'm talking about here crime. They all failed. They all went into, you might say, a prison of their own. Because why? They shut down, they silenced their conscience, they silenced their soul, and they allowed their egos to overpower them. And usually when you are overpowered by your egos, your own desires become your lords, your own, individuals. Like I said, women overpower someone, they will end up, or men overpower, like you're overpowered by someone and you know what they're doing is wrong. Chances are you will physically, and again, overpower others. This is how you silence your ego, your soul, and your conscience. The way you shut it down inside of you is by actually taking your focus onto somebody who's innocent and imprisoning them. You'll always see that pattern if you look for it. And so here, it's important how Joseph responds, and he brings us to that central theme that he's trying to now bring front and center. These two slaves enter the prison. Remember, they were all serving. These were individuals. One was the baker, I believe, and another was, I think, a carpenter. Or anyway, they were used to be served. Yeah, here it is. They were the butler. Some was the baker. And they initially were serving like the kingdom, kind of like Joseph. So they knew of his goodness. Now they all ended up in prison. Then for a different reason, he was there in prison. But he brings them to this central theme. Like, again, what he told himself, he's telling them. So they ask for a dream, but before he gives them the dream, the interpretation of the dream, he brings them to something much more important than, again, trying to go back to alternate reality. And he tells them that, I'll inform you about the interpretation of dreams before the arrival of food that is sent to you. This is the knowledge. This knowledge is part of what I have been taught by my Lord. So he's now reached the point of prophethood. I have renounced the way of those who do not believe in God and who deny the hereafter. There are people, again, who are in that state. They don't recognize hereafter because, again, the lack of clarity on faith, whether it's by people of faith who misapply and misuse religion, or they don't clarify faith accurately. So there are people who are not convinced. But there are people, as I have shown with Zulaikha, the brothers of Joseph, the people of the kingdom, the women, the ones who could judge the situation accurately with reason because they could see the evidence. They renounce the hereafter in the sense that they avoid justice. They avoid truth. They reject evidence when it's clear as day. So that's a kind of denial of the hereafter. No one can call us to account, so it's okay if we imprison an innocent person. When you recognize the hereafter, you say, hey, I'm not going to put an innocent person in the hereafter in prison because I know that I will be called to account on the day of judgment. That's what I'm trying to get at. And he's telling them, again, he's telling them what he tells himself because he rejected the call and he rejected to be great in alternate reality. I have adopted the way of my forefathers, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. It's not for us to associate any with Allah in his divinity. It is out of Allah's grace upon us and upon mankind. He didn't require us to serve any other than Allah. And yet most people do not give thanks. So here they're asked, he's being called to be someone great in alternate reality. He rejects that. These are individuals and he's seeing them this way, but he's using, again, faith. These individuals have other lords, their egos, they're serving their egos, their interests, they're serving their desires, but they reject serving the one and only God, which is, again, to promote justice, to promote reason, on earth, that you're going to be held accountable. Just the fact that you got away doesn't mean you'll get away in the hereafter. You will be held to account. So he's putting before them, remember, he was invited to alternate reality and he rejected. So he's putting to those individuals an invitation to reality. He's telling them this is reality. And I'm inviting you to reflect on reality, where you value your soul, you value your conscience, and you turn to God. So fellow prisoners, he says, Is it better there be diverse lords? Again, your interest, your egos, your desires, your being great, an alternate reality. All of these are, again, lords over you. If you serve them, you're not going to be able to do justice on earth. Impossible, as we have seen. You're not going to be able to do justice on earth. Or just God, the one, the irresistible. Here again, the names of God, the one, irresistible, Qahar, Al-Wahid al-Qahar. These are again names of God. So it's important to look at the names of God in this particular chapter that are also being used. So you got here a call to alternate reality. All these gods, your desires, your being great, your being important, being relevant, or turning to God where you value your conscience, you value your soul, and God inspires you on how to receive light from Him and to nurture light in the world and to nurture justice. That light will lead to justice, to solutions that divide and turn us against each other. Those whom you serve besides Him are merely idle names that you and your fathers have fabricated without Allah sending down any sanction for them. All authority to govern rests only with God. He has commanded that you serve none but Him. That is the right way of life, though most people are altogether unaware. So again, أكثر الناس لا يعقلون. Another thing, is they don't reason, they don't reflect, if they see the evidence that comes to them unaware, could also mean that they don't act, they don't accept the responsibility that given the power that they have to act upon it and promote justice. Fellow prisoners, this is the interpretation of your dreams. I will not go into here, but I'd like us to just to make this the stopping point. Joseph in prison. I'll come back to the others in future months, as I would like to transition to, he was moved from the kingdom, being from to the top of the kingdom down, similar to what we've seen with Moses, went in from being killed or about to be killed into, about to be killed in the basket into the house of the Pharaoh. And here Joseph went from being thrown in the well, picked up by the caravan, sold into slavery, into the kingdom, but now he's put in prison. And we're going to transition into Moses, where Moses now goes from being the prince in the kingdom into the Midian. So both prophets are being nurtured. He's being nurtured in prison. He's being nurtured in the land of the Midian. But both prophets are being nurtured now spiritually. They're turning to God. Verily He alone is all hearing, all knowing. So they're turning to God, given the dilemma that they're facing, and the people around them have become cheerleaders for crime. And they shut down, you might say, their conscience. They shut down their voice of their soul, which they recognize because the projection, what they're doing, their actions are wrong, but they shut it down. And so they're being nurtured by God. And this, again, shutting down of all doors is aimed to protect the individual who's being called to alternate reality, not to go in that direction, because they eventually will sell their conscience too. And this is how we get into like a genocide. You know, it starts off slow. It starts off with denial. It starts off with rejection, seeing others as objects. And then it gets into where you start to market and sell to society. And they give up their conscience. It's not that they don't know. They know. It's that they don't want to act on what they know. And so the punishment for their failure to act on what they don't know is that God says, well, give me your conscience. You failed to act. You were tested with power. You saw the signs, but you failed to act. And this is something as a warning for all of us. When you see something is wrong, you don't act upon it, means to stop it, you don't hate it in your heart, then that conscience, that sensor, you know how they have like a sensor and things that can identify if something is wrong, that sensor will be taken away from you. And that becomes a punishment from God. So as we look at it, I mentioned this here about how this person comes to individual, his name is Hassan al-Basri, and he says, you know, I'm doing all of these sins or disobedience, and look, I'm not getting punished. And he says, but you are getting punished. You're just not recognizing that you're not being punished. You're not seeing it accurately. You know, you're wearing the wrong lens of how you're looking at the situation. And he says, how? And has he not denied you the sweetness of making supplication? We saw again with Joseph how he turned to God, all hearing, all knowing. Has not many days passed you by, you didn't read one verse of the Quran? Has not many nights passed you by, you didn't pray night prayers? Has God Most High prevented your tongue from remembrance of him? Has not obedience become difficult for you and disobedience facilitated for you? See how that disobedience became facilitated for them? Now they're thinking of it like this: we got away. We must be clever and smart, but no, you're being punished. You're being punished. Disobedience was facilitated for you. That censor of what's right or wrong was taken away from you. Did you not forget the next life? And that's what happens. Again, I don't believe in the next life because of ignorance, in the sense that you were not given the correct knowledge. But I don't believe in the next life because disobedience was facilitated for me. Because when I recognized the signs that I was wrong, I tried to overpower the truth and overpower reason and try to, again, call to the wrong that I was doing. As a way, like, if I can get a bandwagon or cheerleaders to support the wrong I'm doing, then therefore I'm right and I can claim victory. So that awareness of the next life is taken away from you. It's a punishment and you don't reflect upon it. So the man said yes. So Hassan said, then that's the punishment. The punishment is God hated obedience from you. So God didn't facilitate obedience for you. You could listen to it here. I'll share that with you again. So, and the treasures that God gives those who are innocent, but overpowered, as Joseph was. Faith is a treasure from the treasury of God. This is by Sheikh Susan Bayrak. The faithful one is the richest among men, for he knows that he needs nothing from anyone except God, the only true rich one. Faith is the treasure from the treasury of Allah. And I'm not in any way like dismissing the pain, the suffering that they're going through, but comforting them in ways that helps them, or helps me, I should say, there are teachers, to deal with the situation, or to struggle with our feelings, with our emotions, with the situation. So we do not go into alternate reality land. Again, when they continue to keep going down that road of disobedience, as you know, the Prime Minister Moshe Sharat, their personal diaries, he writes in May of 1955, where he quotes Moshe Dayan as follows: Israel must see the sword as the main, if not the only, instrument with which to keep its moral high and to retain its moral tension. So it wasn't just October 7th. As you could see, this is policy, this is pattern. This is, again, the road they chose to travel. The sword is the way that they function and the way they interact with people in the region. This is their own words. Toward this end, it may, no, it must. Notice here, it must invent dangers. And we're seeing that now with bombing Syria, bombing Lebanon, bombing, looking for ways to instigate war with Iran. I showed an earlier article where they want to destabilize the region in the Middle East. It must invent dangers because they become addicted to danger. That's kind of like people who go bungee jumping. They become addicted to danger, to war. It becomes an addiction. And to do this, it must adopt the method of provoke and revenge. So they bombed Lebanon, they provoked Lebanon. And if Lebanon doesn't respond, they'll keep bombing. And then when Lebanon responds, then they'll go into revenge. Of course, they won't tell the story that they are inventing dangers and they're provoking Lebanon. They'll tell the story like this, as I mentioned. No, I'm here. They'll tell the story like this. We were just minding our own business, coming to visit, but look, oh, I didn't put it on.
In a beautiful port city called Eilat. It is all the way at the southern tip of Israel, right on the Red Sea. And what's blown me away just in the past few days is that the news events here are almost never spoken about in the US or North America as a whole. And if they are, they're spoken about inaccurately. One very good example, today, just a few hours ago, armed drones were heading for Eilat, and obviously they were shot down before hitting the city that is peaceful, and you really never hear much going on here. And they were coming from Iraq, from the Islamic resistance movement in Iraq. So now we have Islamic resistance coming from the east. We have Hamas coming from the west. We have Hezbollah coming from the north, and Houthis coming from the south. Like, what else? What else are we going to sprinkle in there? And it's just unbelievable to me that after 20 years in North American media, none of my colleagues are talking about this. This is not in any outlet. The New York Times didn't cover it. The New York Post didn't cover it. I mean, we're talking left, right, center, any outlet. Nobody is talking about what's really happening, and nobody is talking about how it's coming from all directions at this point, which blows my...
No, it's again that perpetual victim mentality of how they see themselves, even though in their own words, in their own diaries, publicly, they're seeking to destabilize the region. As of 1955 forward, let's invent dangers, let's adopt the method of provoke and revenge, and let's hope, but not for peace, for war with Arab countries. This is literally how they've been functioning or malfunctioning in the Middle East. And again, when you listen to them from alternate reality land, they're like, we're surrounded by Arabs, we just want to wipe us off the face of the earth. And Even though the evidence is there, it's not like you're putting words in their mouth. Again, I showed with Netanyahu, I can show you more, but again, it's this nonstop, destabilize the region, divide and conquer, constantly invent dangers, provoke revenge, hope for new wars with countries, and get rid of our troubles and acquire our space. So they're looking not just to take, this is again in Israel's sacred terrorism. They worship, they're addicted to terrorism. They're addicted to war crimes. Well, you don't just commit war crimes and then suddenly you turn into a peacemaker and you value human rights. If you're not held accountable, you're acting on that nature. You'll keep looking for more ways to do war crimes and more ways to commit terrorism and more ways to create wars, because that's just how people are. If you give someone, for example, here, it doesn't matter what race, what sex they are, you give them, let them get away with a crime, they'll go and commit another crime, and they'll commit another crime, and they'll keep going unless they're stopped. You know, criminals don't stop unless they're stopped. This is what we're asked to accept the responsibility to stop Israel. Not because they're Jewish, because in their own words, in their own actions, they want to invent danger, they want to provoke revenge, they want to keep hoping for wars with countries in the region to keep destabilizing the region. And then these individuals come to survive in other countries. And people don't like immigrants. Well, it's like, then the solution is stop destabilizing their countries, stop arming Israel, and stop engaging in this reckless behavior, which forces people to survive, to come to your borders. So you're not seeing what the violence that you are inventing and hoping for and in their countries, but you're only looking at the byproduct of what comes to your borders. At times, again, the problem is, as Edward Allan Poe said, convince myself, I seek not to convince. So here we are just conveying, people have a choice to accept or reject. At times, the problem in communication is not due to difference of opinion or viewpoint, but the person you're engaging in is not convinced of their own actions or beliefs, meaning that if you really cared about women's rights, that you claim these are your common values, democracy, freedom of press, all of these you're being tested with, you would have acted. You would have acted when you were called to act. So here, again, in this video, Ahad's voice, story with the Israeli soldiers. Ayan Hersiati or Asarnamon. When you're convinced, you're willing to face prison, as we've shown with Joseph, 1,000 times for your conviction. When you're not convinced, you seek to subdue and overpower others to your opinion and viewpoints. I have shown with Zulaikha, where she again went from to recognize something is wrong with that criminal nature. She really did not, they don't believe in the values that they oppose, that I'm trying to get at. Because if they believed in it, they recognize it's wrong. They recognize, otherwise she would not be projecting it. Like they wouldn't say Ahli Hospital, it was Hamas. They would say, come investigate. If it was us, we would make, we will do reparations for, the bombing of, they knew it was wrong, so they went ahead and threw it on Hamas. When it was proven that they were wrong, then they tried to justify and normalize and then say, this bombing of this hospital, bombing of that hospital, bombing of this hospital, bombing. It went from bombing one hospital to bombing all the hospitals. So the road of disobedience was facilitated for them, because that's the road they chose to travel. And all of this common values, we're not debating your common values or the freedoms or human rights or free speech, or we're not debating that. We're debating, are you convinced of these values that you're trying to sell? Because you're not convinced, and the fact that you're not convinced is you resort to overpowering others to accept your opinion and viewpoint, even when you're proven wrong. What I'm getting at is this part, the kaid, the overpowering, the sinful cunning games to overpower truth, to distort truth, to kill the messenger, kill the negotiator. You know, you're not willing to be a contender, either in war, in argument, in discussion. You're not willing to be a contender. You always have to get into these cunning games that give you the power over others to distort and kill the messenger. You can't lose gracefully. Something you will notice about criminals or individuals who have a criminal psychology, criminal-like functioning way, reality of their nature. They can never face accountability or justice, and they cannot lose. So I always look for loss. This person experienced loss. How did they lose? They lose gracefully. It's kind of like Trump. Insurrection. Why does it need insurrection? Just lose gracefully. Can't lose gracefully. It's a very, very telling sign that person should not be put in power. Again, that overpower mentality, when someone always seeks to overpower others, they're not convinced of what they're claiming to be their values. They're not convinced. A clear indication when you kill the negotiator, when you're trying to overpower the UN experts, you know, and enforce your will. Again, all of those are indications and telling signs you are not convinced. That's why you're trying to overpower others and force them to your will, subjugate them. If people cannot reject what you stand upon and you're not willing to face the fire, threatening ICJ, threatening ICC, threatening anyone who does not see Israel in the light that it wants to be seen in, and you're not convinced of your own viewpoint. So why should anyone? So I'll share that again here. So she went to prison for what she believed was right. Joseph went to prison. MLK went to prison who knows how many times. But when you are willing to destroy an entire country, stabilize an entire region, and you're not willing to even face an international court of justice, you know, those are very, very telling signs, again, of criminal minds, criminal behavior. And those who have the power and are not willing to act are also being tested. Because if they do not, over time, the road of criminality, they'll go from just speaking to them becoming cheerleaders. And that road of disobedience will be facilitated for them. And that conscience, which is a censor of right and wrong, will be taken away from them. It's a gift. This conscience is a gift from God. And if you're not grateful for that gift, God will take it away from you. So it's a choice that you have. Do you value your conscience? Do you value your soul or not? Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. rahmatullah wa barakatuh.